John queued up while we're. By the way, John's called the last couple weeks in a row.
All right.
And the first week, his proof for God was prophecy, but that, after a lengthy discussion, came down to we'll know these things in the future. So I told him to call back in the future when we know these things. And last week, he called in and acknowledged that it wasn't quite the future. Yeah, I mean, it was definitely 1 week in the future.
Yeah, it was at least that much in the future.
It wasn't far enough in the future.
It was a sort of future. Yeah.
But evidently this week, John has something entirely different.
And what would that be?
That will demonstrate the truth of a God existing.
Oh, okay.
So, hey, John, how you doing?
Yeah, very good, thanks. Hello, how are you two?
Oh, hello, John.
I had a tooth pulled, so I'm probably a little more irritable this week.
But not to worry, not to worry.
But Martin is here to keep me in check.
Oh, am I? Is that my...
Yeah,
I'll do
nice
that.
to meet you, Martin, as well.
Likewise, John.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about heaven, hell, and why God allows suffering, if that's all right with you, or we can talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Well, the first questions that leap to mind, this issue of why does God allow suffering presumes there's a God, and so I'm not necessarily sure that we should spend much time presuming something that hasn't been demonstrated. Now, I'm happy for you to give arguments for why you believe certain things, but much like the last caller, if you're only calling in to tell me what you think about heaven or hell or why God allows suffering, your personal interpretations of these, without some sort of fact-based, rational argument to support the idea that they're true, I don't know why we would waste time on that.
But yeah, and because, the world has been full of cultures that didn't have this problem, worrying about wringing their hands over why God allows suffering. The ancient Greeks, their gods, drank and partied and got in fights and screwed and did all kinds of stuff. So clearly those were gods that had, that they certainly didn't expect their gods to prevent all pain and suffering. So it's very possible to have a God concept where that doesn't even apply.
So you can make whatever case you want, but fair warning, if your argument doesn't rise above the previous caller, or if it's something that somebody could argue on behalf of the existence of Krampus or why Krampus abducts the terrible children at Christmas, then we're probably going to be done again.
Yeah.
Feel free.
Because, you have the Abrahamic God that everyone wants to be sort of your perfect big brother is always looking after you, and then this creates the problem of evil. Or you could have the Olympian gods that are just a bunch of, awesome partying drunks. But in both cases, if we're going to talk about them meaningfully, as if these are real things that we should care about in our realities, then that's where we have to start with, Either prove the Olympians, prove the Abrahamic God, or if not, make persuasive presentations that why believing in them is rational. We'll go from there. But beyond that, it's like, yes, so what? God allows suffering. That's you guys' problem to work out, not ours.
Yeah, but I have heard Matthew talking to members of Christendom and been in conversations about these subjects.
Yes.
So, just briefly, that with heaven, if God wanted humans to be in heaven, he could have made them in heaven in the first place.
Cool. I've asked that exact same question. So I've asked why wouldn't God do that? And your position is that he could have.
Yeah, but why have the human form and why have the planet Earth and the physical realm?
I don't know.
When God could have done that, if that's what God wanted for humanity to be in heaven, he could have just made them there in the first place. So
according to the lore, wasn't that the idea, right? I mean, God had it all set up down here, and then Eve was tempted and screwed up the big plan, which presumably God should have seen coming, but being omniscient and everything, but didn't, and so he had to kind of rejigger his plan a bit. Which, makes it the Old Testament really needed a story editor at that point, but...
God has the ability of foreknowledge, but he chooses not to use that ability on most occasions.
How do you know?
Yeah, I mean, this is fine, John. The problem is, it's like... I don't know how much you've read of our show blog. It goes back several years, so there's a big backlog. What you may have missed at some point a few years back was that Russell Glasser, who is the other host, yes, I'm sure you've talked to him, and I'm usually on with Russell. Russell came up with this whole thing that he calls the Star Trek rule. And it describes this curious situation that atheists find themselves in when we are approached by believers like yourself who want to have these kinds of conversations. It sounds like, you know, you're having a conversation with someone and then they all want to go into, you know, Star Trek, talking about Captain Kirk. Or it could be, you know, whatever their favorite, you know, headcanon is about the Avengers or the Marvel Universe or you know, whatever anime they're into. And they're talking about these things like they're real and they're meaningful and that they should be important aspects of our lives. You're like, well, wait, hang on. Start over here. Yeah, you know, it sounds exactly like that. I mean, you can start and the powers that he has, that he could exercise if he wanted to, but it chooses not to, and this. And it all sounds to us like you're describing some vast manga and a big story.
Angels dancing on the head of a pin.
Yeah, and it doesn't. We need to have you know, you need to start from a basis of why would we think that this is anything other than that this is an actual real thing that we could concern ourselves with.
I'm fine with doing a reductio ad absurdum where you assume for the sake of argument that X is the case in order to show why it's in conflict.
Yeah.
You told us God can do this and God can do that and he chooses to do this. And my question to you is, how do you know that that's the case?
Yeah, so, well, beliefs count for nothing. So just to go back on Martin's point, I totally agree with that, all that he said. So beliefs count for nothing. And so we have to learn the truth. And the truth is not dependent on us knowing about it, but if you're saying what's the basis for proof for all that I'm saying,
what is the basis for your beliefs? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it goes back to difficult proof and a little bit of difficult proof as well. Is the fulfilled prophecy found in the Bible. That is.
You can disconnect John again. I told you, John, you could call back when we were in the future to be able to confirm that. Also, I'd recommend you go to my YouTube channel and watch the video on prophecy because you are grossly misinformed about prophecy. When I ask you why you believe that God can do this and doesn't do this, even if you had a laundry list of confirmed predictions that came true, that in no way tells you why. It in no way tells you anything about the mind of God because you can't even tie a God to the reason why those prophecies came true. And the worst part of all of this is that you don't actually have a laundry list of prophecies that have come true. What you've got are some claims that have been interpreted as prophecies and in the fulfillment, which is also a matter of interpretation. If I predict what the weather's going to be tomorrow, if I predict that eventually we're going to have a female president in the United States of America, I don't have to have any sort of supernatural powers to make those things come true. And even if you saw someone performing on stage as a mentalist and they were able to tell you the word that you're thinking of, that doesn't mean that they have psychic powers. And even if they did, that doesn't confirm how or why those powers work. It doesn't let you get anywhere near the claims that you're making. Instead, what you're doing is saying, much like the first caller, here are these things, and without any justification other than those things, I believe the best explanation for those is that there's a God. And I'm going to take it a step further and tell you what God's characteristics are, what he's capable of doing, and why he chooses not to. You are pulling shit right out of your ass.
Which is usually where it comes from. And see, that's the problem with prophecy is that in addition to the situation of establishing like a legitimate causal link. Oh, here's a thing that happened, and here's something that was written ages ago that seems to describe this thing. Well, first off, to what degree are you sort of fitting all of this, retrofitting all of this in order to make sure that, in order to guarantee that yes, these are valid data points that are being made. That specific. It's always curious to me how no prophecy has ever existed that written in the 3rd century on a on a cave wall by a stick covered in dung, where someone said, on X and X and date, on the year 2001 of a calendar that has yet to be created, a horrible event will occur in a city that does not yet exist called Manhattan. Yeah, specificity would be awesome.
Prophecies, right? In order to count for anything at all, need to be specific, answerable by a single instance, and not prone to interpretation. And then here's the problem that I was trying to point out a minute ago. Even when you get that, the next question is, how is it that someone was able to accurately make this prediction? And the only answer, until you demonstrate an explanation, is I don't know. And if you start by claiming that clearly they must have had supernatural powers, you are proclaiming that you are sufficiently omniscient or sufficiently knowledgeable that you have excluded all possible naturalistic explanations, including luck or reasonable intelligence or advanced computing or time travelers. How did you discount the idea that Doctor Who came back and told him something?
Yeah, supernatural, that's a word that people throw out there as a catch-all sort of Band-Aid. When it's like, it assumes that the supernatural is a thing that has a methodology that it can be comprehended, and we haven't even gotten there. So to say that something's supernatural is the opposite of an explanation, because it's just an empty word.
Yeah, by the way, let's go ahead and get Thaddeus queued up. But for both of those first two callers, science has a limit. Mm-hmm. And that limit is not something that science said, here's where we're stopping.
Yeah.
It comes from a recognition that we currently don't have a mechanism to identify the existence of the supernatural or any way to determine causal connections between the supernatural and the natural.
And it's not only not just that, it's not even science reaching a point and going, well, might as well throw our hands up. This one's just going to... we're going to be baffled forever about this one, so we may as well just stop.
It's a recognition that we can't make declarations about those things. Mm-hmm. And when theistic callers try to come in and say, I know that science can't tell you anything about the supernatural, but I can. No, you're full of it. Mm-hmm. You need to demonstrate, and by the way, as soon as you can demonstrate a mechanism by which you are able to know what is generally considered currently unknowable, as soon as you demonstrate that, man, you win the Nobel Prize, the Templeton Prize, you overturn everything in the world because you've added a whole new area of study. I just don't see. Do we get the next, just whatever caller you want, just cue them up. No. But Christians are claiming to run around being little God detectors. They're claiming to be able to detect what most of them would think is acknowledged as undetectable. Mm-hmm. And they don't recognize that conflict, just like the first caller is claiming, he thinks he has a justified belief in something that he acknowledged isn't justified.
Right. This is why, our very first caller, at least he was willing to get to the point where he's just like, I can't justify. Because we hear these arguments, right? We hear these proofs and this logical stuff. But to be perfectly honest, is there a single sitting in a pew at church believer in this country anywhere who was converted to the belief system by that kind of argument? I don't think it is. I don't think that atheists...
These are post hoc explanations.
Yeah. Atheists approach the critique of religion as a set of ideas. It's an intellectual exercise for us. And I think that religious belief lives in this world of emotion and feelings and what gives me pleasure and comfort. And that's the real reason why people embrace these things. They're raised into it, and and these.
It sounds like we have Darth Vader on hold at this point.
What is going on?